The date was November 14th. I remember it because it was my 60th birthday. 60. 60 is supposed to be the victory lap. The finish line. The moment you look back and say, I did it. Instead, I was staring at a white piece of paper on a cherry wood desk. A desk I hadn't even finished paying for. The paper wasn't a party invitation. It was my severance package. Or, as I read it, my life sentence. Restructuring. That was the word they used. It sounded so sterile. So efficient. The man across from me, a kid half my age wearing a tie that cost more than my monthly car payment, kept talking about synergy and optimization. But all I heard was a buzzer going off. Game over. I'd worked for that company for 35 years. 35 years. I gave them my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, my 50s. I missed soccer games, school plays, and anniversaries. For them. I missed seeing my own kids grow up, chasing the next promotion, the next bonus, the next pat on the head. I made the company money. Tons of it. I was the institutional knowledge in that building. And now, I was an opportunity for synergy. I felt the blood drain out of my face. A cold, metallic taste spread across my tongue. It wasn't rage yet. It was worse. It was nothing. A void. I just sat there, the fluorescent light of the conference room buzzing, and thought, this is it. 60 years old. Unemployed. And practically unemployable. Who hires a 60-year-old mid-level manager whose entire skill set is obsolete software and old-school handshake deals? No one. The kid pushed the papers across the desk. He slid a box of tissues toward me, which felt like the cruelest insult of all. I looked at the number on the severance check. It was decent. Enough to feel safe for maybe 6 months, if I was careful. But after that, the mortgage. The college loans still chipping away at my back. The fear. It wasn't just about money. It was about identity. My whole life, my entire sense of self-worth, was wrapped up in that office. In that title. In being the provider. I walked out of that building into the cold November air. It was dark before 5 p.m. The sky matched the color of my mood, heavy, bruised purple. I got in my car. I sat there in the parking lot, the engine off. I looked at the phone, my thumb hovering over my wife Sarah's number. How do you tell the person you promised forever to that the forever just ran out of gas? How do you tell them that the retirement you both planned, the quiet cottage, the trips they deserved, was just vapor? I couldn't do it over the phone. I drove home. The drive was a blur of streetlights and silent panic. I remember walking through the front door. The smell of cinnamon and baked apples hit me. Sarah was in the kitchen humming. She turned around, her face lit up, a cake with 60 candles on the counter behind her. Happy birthday, honey? She moved to hug me. But the hug didn't land right. I was stiff. Cold. She pulled back, her smile fading slowly, like a dimmer switch being turned down. She knew. She'd known me for 40 years. She didn't need a severance letter to read my face. Her eyes searched mine, and the question she asked wasn't about the job. It was about us. What happened, Mark? I didn't have the long, clean, corporate answer. I had the truth. The ugly, shrunken truth. I just looked at her, at the beautiful woman who had sacrificed so much for me, for us, and the words caught in my throat. I couldn't speak. I just reached out and took her hand. I led her past the birthday cake, past the candles that were still waiting to be lit, and sat her down on the couch. And that's when the silence finally broke. Not with a shout. Not with a cry. But with a deep, crushing, and humiliating whisper. I lost it all, Sarah. I lost us. The lie was that I lost the job. The real tragedy was that I realized I'd lost time. I had traded my most valuable asset for a title and a severance package that expired. And on my 60th birthday, the only thing I owned outright was the debt that came with a lifestyle I could no longer afford. I was standing at the edge of a cliff and the wind was picking up. I had no idea how steep the fall was going to be. The next 6 months were a masterclass in controlled collapse. We tried to pretend. We told the kids it was a sabbatical. We told the neighbors I was consulting. The truth was I was just waiting. Waiting for a miracle job offer. Waiting for an old contact to call. Waiting for the universe to correct the horrible mistake it had made. But the phone didn't ring. My resume, with its 35 years of glorious experience, was a liability, not an asset. It was too long. Too expensive. Too much like something from a museum. I'd spend hours on my computer, submitting applications to jobs that were clearly looking for someone 30 years younger. I'd hit send, and feel a flicker of hope. Then the automated, impersonal rejection email would hit my inbox an hour later. Thank you for your interest. We've moved forward with candidates whose experience aligns more closely with our current needs. Current needs? That was the new corporate code for Mark, you're irrelevant. The first thing to go was the false confidence. I went from the corner office guy to the guy who dressed in his old suits just to feel normal while sitting at his kitchen table. I started canceling things. The club membership. The bi-weekly dinner out. The landscaping service. Each cancellation was a small, quiet humiliation. A little chip out of the life we had built. Sarah, bless her soul, was a rock. She never once blamed me. But I saw the worry in her eyes. It was a slow, creeping shadow that she couldn't hide. She started working extra shifts at the community center, teaching art classes. She hadn't had to work full-time in 20 years. Now she was carrying the load. And that, more than the debt, was what broke my sleep. I felt like I had failed my fundamental purpose. To protect and provide. I started sleeping on the couch. I told her I was tossing and turning too much, didn't want to wake her. The truth was I couldn't stand to be that close to her and feel so small. The debt was the monster under the bed that finally crawled out. We'd always lived the American dream version of debt. The manageable, good debt. The mortgage. The 2 nice car payments. A little bit on the credit cards for convenience. But when the primary income stream stopped, the monster roared. I started playing the credit card shuffle. Paying Peter with Paul's card. Taking a cash advance just to cover the mortgage before the grace period ended. My focus shifted entirely from earning to surviving. From growing to stagnating. And the emotional toll was 1,000 times worse than the financial one. I became irritable. Snapping at Sarah over nothing. I'd sit in the living room watching the news, but I wasn't seeing the screen. I was seeing the interest statements. The late notices. The balance owed. One night our son Michael called. He was excited about a potential promotion. He was asking for advice, the kind of professional coaching I used to give him so effortlessly. I listened to him, nodding. But when it was my turn to speak, a toxic wave of envy hit me. He was just starting out, full of momentum. I was ending. I gave him flat, boring advice. I heard the disappointment in his voice before he politely ended the call. That night, I realized I wasn't just a financial burden. I was becoming a psychological liability. I was so consumed by my own failure that I couldn't even be a good father anymore. Then came the rock bottom. I had $1,200 left in my checking account. The mortgage payment was $2,100. I had a choice to make. It was either take a big withdrawal from the $18,000 I had tucked away in a 401k from an old job, incurring a massive penalty, or miss the payment. I called the bank. I knew I needed to buy time. I was professional, polished, and pleading. The woman on the phone was polite but rigid. We can offer forbearance, sir, but it will impact your credit score. Credit score. That number that defined my financial worth. It felt like another symbol of my failure. I hung up, defeated. I was sitting there, the ceiling fan whirring above me, when Sarah walked in. She wasn't holding a late notice. She was holding a small brown box. It was an old wooden jewelry box engraved with her initials. I gave it to her on our 10th anniversary. She opened it. Inside was the diamond necklace I bought her when I got my first big promotion. She slid it out. It was beautiful. Expensive. She looked at me, her eyes wet but determined. I called the pawn shop downtown, Mark. They said they'd give us $600. For the necklace I promised her she'd wear forever. For a symbol of my early, hopeful success. The shame that rushed through me was so sharp, I almost physically doubled over. No, Sarah. Absolutely not. It's just a thing, Mark, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. We need to eat. And you need to stop worrying about things. It's about what's important. She was trying to teach me a lesson in real time. But all I saw was the price of my failure. I stood up, shaking my head. You won't do this. I'll figure it out. I stormed out of the house. I drove. 4 hours. Aimlessly. I finally pulled into a quiet parking lot overlooking a lake. I turned the engine off and sat in the dead silence. I wasn't a man of prayer, but I looked up at the black sky and felt the most profound, desperate sense of isolation. I had spent my life chasing the next rung on the ladder, but I hadn't built a net underneath it. I had been so focused on the income that I had completely ignored the concept of wealth. A job could be taken away. But real wealth, true financial freedom, was a fortress. And mine was a sandcastle. I thought about the money. The $1,200. The $18,000 in the 401k. The mountain of debt. I closed my eyes and for the first time I didn't see the numbers. I saw the years. 60. I saw the next 10, the next 20. I saw a future that wasn't retirement. It was just struggle. And in that moment of absolute darkness, something snapped. Not a breakdown. A breakthrough. A furious, primal anger not at the company, not at the kid with the fancy tie, but at myself. For not knowing. For not paying attention. For being so utterly unprepared for the certainty of change. I was 60. I didn't have 35 years to make it up. I had maybe 15 or 20 good years left. If I was lucky. If I was going to fix this, I couldn't do it the old way. I couldn't rely on a boss, a bonus, or a prayer. I had to build my own fortress. From scratch. And I had to do it faster than anyone thought possible. I drove back home. I didn't say a word about the necklace. I went straight to my home office, the room that had become my tomb, and turned on the computer. It was 2 a.m. I wasn't looking for job postings anymore. I was looking for answers. I typed one simple, terrifying phrase into the search bar. How to invest with no money at 60. The turning point wasn't a giant check or a lottery win. It was the humiliation of the pawn shop moment, fused with the simple, boring, relentless pursuit of knowledge. I became a student again. At 60 years old, I was back in the classroom. The classroom was YouTube. The library. The corners of the internet where people actually talk about the mechanics of wealth, not just the illusion of income. I read everything I could find. I realized how much of my life I had spent making money for other people without ever understanding how money was supposed to work for me. I discovered the concepts of financial literacy. And at the center of it all was one simple, beautiful, devastating idea. Compound interest. The eighth wonder of the world. I understood it intellectually, of course. I was a business guy. But I'd never felt it in my bones. I'd always thought of compounding as something for young people. The 20-year-olds who had decades to let time do the heavy lifting. I was 60. Time was no longer my friend. It was my most precious, non-renewable resource. But then I saw a quote. I don't remember who said it. It just hit me like a splash of cold water. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. No. The game wasn't over. It had just changed. My strategy had to be different. I didn't have 40 years of small, regular contributions. I had to be hyper-efficient with the time I had left. The first victory was facing the numbers. I built a spreadsheet. Not a corporate one with glossy charts. A raw, ugly, honest one. I listed every single debt. The interest rate on each. The mortgage. The cars. The 2 maxed-out credit cards. The total was sickening. I printed it out, put it on the fridge next to my old retirement calculator printouts. I had to look at the monster every single day. The second victory was the attack. I adopted the debt snowball method. It wasn't the fastest way mathematically, but it was the best way psychologically. Smallest debt first. Kill it. Get the emotional win. The feeling of making that final payment, seeing the balance hit zero, it was the first time I felt control in almost a year. I sold the expensive car. I took the $18,000 from the old 401k, swallowed the penalty like a bitter pill, and used every single penny to pay off the high-interest credit cards. It was painful, but it was forward motion. It bought us peace. It allowed Sarah to cut back her hours a little, just enough to take the frantic edge off her stress. The third victory was the investment. I still didn't have a job. But I was delivering pizzas 3 nights a week. It was humiliating wearing that uniform. Getting bossed around by a 19-year-old manager. But I was moving. I was earning. And every single dollar I earned that wasn't immediately required for survival went into a low-cost, broadly diversified index fund. I started with $100. $100. It felt pathetic. Like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. But I remembered the principle, consistency over magnitude. I committed to $100 every 2 weeks. No matter what. Rain, snow, flat tire, bad tip night, $100 went in. Then $150. Then $200. I created an automatic transfer on payday so I wouldn't even see the money. It was an iron will applied to a sliver of capital. Sarah saw the change in me. I wasn't the despairing man on the couch anymore. I was busy. I was focused. I was reading about market fluctuations, learning the language of ETFs and mutual funds. She walked in one day and looked at my screen. The graph was red. Down. In my old life, I would have panicked. I would have checked my 401k 10 times that hour. I looked at her and shrugged. Just means the index fund is on sale today, I said. Cheaper shares. She smiled. A real smile. Mark, you sound like a completely different person. I was. The biggest shift wasn't in my bank account. It was in my mindset. I stopped seeing my age as a constraint. I started seeing it as wisdom gained. I knew how life worked. I knew about setbacks. I knew how to absorb a punch and keep moving. The journey wasn't smooth. There were days the market dipped and I'd feel that familiar twist of panic. There were nights I was delivering pizza to a house I used to consult for. But I held fast to the one idea that had become my anchor: process, not outcome. I focused on the process, earn the money, live below the means, invest the difference, be consistent. The outcome would take care of itself. After 2 years, I checked my investment account. It wasn't a life-changing amount. It was maybe $14,000. But I looked at the line that showed my contributions versus market gains. And the market gains were higher. Not by much, but they were higher. The money I was earning for myself, through the simple act of showing up and being patient, was finally earning money for me. My $100 was becoming $102, then $105. It was slow. It was boring. But it was unstoppable. I wasn't rich. I was just free from the panic. I was no longer the victim of my past decisions. I was the quiet, determined architect of my future. I had found the furnace of consistency, and I was feeding it every single day. 4 years had passed since the day I got fired. I was 64. I had a new job. It wasn't a CEO position. It was a part-time role as a supply chain manager for a small, ethical nonprofit. The pay was a third of what I used to make. But the work was meaningful and the stress was non-existent. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need the salary. I enjoyed it, I appreciated it, but I didn't need it to survive. Because of the 4 years of relentless, boring consistency, the small fund I had built had reached a point of critical mass. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. The mortgage was finally paid off. The pizza delivery job was long gone. The $200 a month I was investing, plus the small gains, meant that if I ever lost the nonprofit job, we would be fine. We had options. That was the victory. Not the money. The options. The peace. One evening, I was on the porch swing with Sarah. The night was quiet. I was looking at the old porch light, thinking about how my life had changed, when she reached over and put her hand on mine. "You never did sell my necklace," she said gently. I shook my head. "Never had to." "What would you have done if you hadn't found the new path, Mark?" I thought about it. I looked up at the stars. "I would have broken," I admitted. "I would have chased the next salary. I would have lived in fear, chasing the market, trying to make a killing." "But what did you do instead?" "I chose to be boring," I said, a small laugh escaping me. "I chose to be patient. I chose to believe in the math and not the hype." The real change in my life was becoming the mentor instead of the manager. Young people at the nonprofit would come into my office. They'd ask about career paths, about moving up. And I wouldn't talk about titles or bonuses. I'd talk about time. I'd pull out a scrap of paper and show them the formula for compounding. I'd tell them my story, the humiliation, the fear. I'd tell them, "You have the one thing I lost and had to fight to buy back: time. You can start with $50 a month right now, and by the time you're my age, you will have a kingdom." I had to start with $200 at 60 to feel safe. You have a chance to feel free at 40. I started teaching a small, free financial literacy class at the local community center. Not about get rich quick, but about stay sane slowly. About the power of the boring win. About consistency. About letting your money work harder than you do. I didn't become rich in the traditional sense. We still drive an older car. We still take modest vacations. But my account balance today, the one I check once a quarter, not once an hour, has grown past the total of my entire severance package. The money itself is no longer the point. The lesson is the point. The great lesson of my 60-plus years isn't about how much you can earn. It's about how much you can keep. It's about being the quiet, patient custodian of your own future. It's about having the discipline to put your head down and contribute, even when the amount feels insignificant. It's about letting go of the ego that tells you need the big house and the fancy car, and embracing the freedom that comes with the small, quiet victory of financial peace. I didn't become rich. I became free. And that feeling, the feeling of waking up at 64, knowing that your life is finally, truly, in your own hands, is worth more than all the gold in the world. So, whatever age you are right now, if you're 20, you have a superpower called time. Use it. If you're 40, you have the knowledge of your career. Apply it to your own wealth. And if you're 60, standing in the dark, feeling like the music has stopped, remember this. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. Stop waiting for the miracle job. Stop waiting for the lottery. Start the process. Be patient. Be consistent. And watch your own small, quiet victory grow. Because the truth is, it is never too late to start building your future. The only person who decides when your life is over is you. And my life. It just started.